Going for got one foot in the sleeve, and the result, of course, tore the coat to pieces. And Paddy's chasing after the whole setup with the pitchfork. And when John Hopkins turned up, he said, "Hoppy, this is just what a man would expect to find at a place like this." And naturally, of course, had to go back to the cutter. But Hopkins is still down there, these two old boys, and funny men, particularly John. He maintains nowadays he's got 3 eyes. He had an occasion for an operation in Shepparton for a cataract, and apparently got out of bed somehow or other, and the patch over his eye dropped on the floor, so he picked it up and put it back on again, and apparently got infected, and he lost the sight of it. But he's since had the other one done, and he's quite good, and so he's got a glass over that, plus the crook eye and the one that's been fixed. He said he's got 3 eyes nowadays, instead of 2, which would be typical Hoppy. But a man of legend in the area. His father, he maintains, came to Boozy. He was rowed across the Murray River by an avo on a sheet of bark. That's how he got here, he said. It was probably all rubbish, would be rubbish. But he's carried on much the same way with some awful tripe, and I diverge onto him because he is an institution in so many ways. Tell you anything? He has a second-hand car yard down there, which I'd say would cover 50 acres, and nobody'd know what's in it. I don't think he'd know himself, but he's still got it anyway, and always out to make a deal, and is so widely known throughout the whole of the area for miles. He used to drive at one time for Minties, who were a big car mob in Wagga, and he used to go down to Melbourne as a driver. And he said, I'd have to get home. And he was driving his own old Studebaker, I think, and he said, on the way home, he struck a big abo, he said, out on the One Tree Plain. He said, we got to arguing, he said, so I took him on, he said, got the hiding of my life. Be all bull, he was probably never on the One Tree Plain. But this is the sort of fellow he is, and it wasn't very far from Walden's, whom the tale was about on the chaff cutter. And I started to say about Harry Nunn. His sisters both live over the road, and his brother's still in Tungamah. One of his first jobs was to go to a neighbour's to cut chaff on Walden's cutter. And old Andrew Mellon had 2 old sisters. Old Lizzie, she was about 6'6", and old Jane, about 6'3". Andy was the youngest, so they always yoked the team up and did everything for him. All he had to do was drive the plough. But on this occasion, they go there to cut hay. Well, if you're new to the cutter, the other blokes you get in first, and if they didn't like the tucker, they just pass it down the table. On this occasion, he'd stayed out with the neighbour, Mr. Mellon, to a bit of a yarn while they had a wash, and came in, and he had 12 young 3-parts black Orpingtons on his plate. So he started to cry, and I wouldn't have blamed him either. Like, it's his first job out, and he has 12 half-plucked Orpingtons on his plate. They were rough old people, and as mean as cats, and they're all passed on now. But I've seen so much of that sort of thing, more probably than my brother George, because I stayed around here and saw some funny things and some funny people. I remember old Squeaky Jack McMahon, where Paddy Wren stuck the chops in his pocket. I was only a kid, and a fellow called Jack O'Day, he's dead now, been dead for years, decided to fight old Squeaky Jack, both Irishmen, at the shop. And my dad agreed to be the referee. Well, Mum left the set-up altogether, because me, big long nose, I was going to see what was going on anyway. So I'm peering out the shop door, and old Jack O'Day, oh no, he wasn't old, he was much younger than McMahon. McMahon was full of whiskey, and I don't mean maybe. Decided to fight, right, he would fight, and he had a squeaky voice. Oh, wow, oh, wow, that's the type of voice he had. When I was younger, I could take him up, but now I can't. And he said, right, he would fight, but he would want to have a pee first. In those days, the old steel rack was outside. Well, I reckon he peed for half an hour. By that time, old Jack O'Day, or young Jack, had shadow-sparred himself till he was knocked up. And they lined up, of course, and the old fellow said, like all seconds out of the ring, she's on. 2 hits and arse of red went Jack O'Day, and the fight was over. But he knocked himself up shadow-sparring at old Jack while he had a pee. And it was the longest pee I think I'd ever saw. And as I say, my mother left, she wouldn't stay to see anything of that sort of thing going on. There's some funny things went on down there. We had an old watchmaker, a fellow called Walter Block. George should remember this. He lived in the shop, I'd say for about 5 years, up the top end of it, lived there. He'd make the watches all right, or fix them, but his bro was a bottle of plonk. And I can remember old Bob May bringing him across 4 or 5 possums, which he'd scun, and he used to cook them on a sheet of iron on top of the forge. He did too. And this particular day, the old fellow must have got sorry for him, my dad. So he brings home some sausages he'd bought up at Havig's butcher shop. And being a bit under the weather, they'd sort of dropped out, and he trailed them a bit, but that didn't matter. And a pound of butter to cook them on. He'd had old Block living on possums. So the sheet of iron's out, so the old fellow said, no, that was no good. So he got the old shovel, and I don't know where that's gone to. It was about a 14-inch by 12 coke shovel. And Mark Williams, who worked there, had only just recently shipped some horse manure. So the old fellow picks up the shovel, pops the pound of butter in the snags on top, and stuck her up on top of the forge, and there, Block, have a decent feed. Right. So the old Big Ben clock always sat up the top end of the shop. The middle roof was off, got blown off in a storm years before. And every time old Walter would want a bottle of plonk, he'd say, George, the clock has stopped. Oh, this Walter, fix the clock, Walter. How much? 4 and 6. Right, that's good. This particular day, after he'd produced the pound of butter and the sausages, Walter said, George, the clock has stopped. I said, Walter, we'll bring it down here. So Walter brings the clock down. Funny old fellow with glasses on. He used to get boozed and sing operator all night. Old Pommy. Sing and sing and sing and sing. Anyway, the old fellow said, put her there, Walter, on the anvil. Picks up the 14-pound hammer, which I've still got, and goes bang. Well, there was lumps of clock went from one side of the place to the other. Now, Walter, he said, you fix the clock. Right, George. Old fellow gave him his 4 and 6 in there. Well, that was the end of the clock. There was bits of clock, I'll never forget it. Bang. God, there was some. Oh, God's truth. There's so many things have gone on down there that one forgets a lot of them, and I'd want to be more astute than I am at the moment to come up with them.
You remember, Norman, can you tell us about that time that, the fellow that used to collect the junk, and he had some false teeth and some aspirin in a glass? Remember that?
Oh, Christ, yes. We'll come on to that one. But one other, Netto Day, a brother of the bloke I was talking about a while ago, when farmers produced a horse team to get them shod, they were unbroken, nothing surer. And I, at those days, was with Dad, working with him. And there was one, could just get him in the door. He had a head about, when he stuck it up in the air, it was about 20 hands. Whoa, up in there with the collar still on him. And he had a flop lip. Oh, lip used to go, and the flies, about 4 million flies hanging around the lip. And Dad bent down to pick up his front foot to fit the shoe, and he car kicked him, meaning that he threw his great long leg forward, hit the old fellow about here somewhere in the brisket, nearly knocked him down. The old fellow got up, crossed 4 bags of cats, walked around, took a look at him, this old flap lip. Young horse too, must have got him in, so he just hauled over and hit him. Well, it took all the hide clean off him, this old horse's teeth. The old fellow picked up the rasp, gave him about 6 hits across the backside, and said, well, serves me right. Well, I shot the bugger. And, oh, God, I saw some funny things over that type of thing. But one day, much later, Sandra and a mate of hers, you there, Mother? She's gone. Pinched my ute and headed off down the creek. And she boxed the gears, which you could do in it, and went across to a fellow called Jack Dickey, who's still alive, widely known, about 83 I think he is, mean, miserable, dirt, rubbish, Christ knows what, to ring up. And then when they get there, Jack had a lady's dress on and nothing else. She's sitting up there, or he was, and he'd picked up a packet of, or a box or something of aspirin or dispirin at the tip, and he stuck it up in one of the usual joints, and they start to drip. So he put a glass underneath him and caught the drip off that, and he reckoned that was the best medicine he ever had in his life. This is fact, it dripped off there. This is right. And recently Jack had
he had his false teeth in the glass.
Yes, there you go, cleaned him up with it. Yeah. But oh, hopeless man. You want to get bumped to tell you that better than I could.
And
but
the aspirin fell into the glass of false teeth with the water, and
so he drank a lot.
Yeah. He said he couldn't waste it.
No, he couldn't waste it. That was his form. But staying originally, it had dripped down into the glass and from up above where they'd got hold and just dripped out of the packet. But lived on nothing all his life. Very wealthy man. What the hell he'll ever do with it, I don't know. And he's still down the creek there. They'll bulldoze the place over when he dies, no doubt, or burn it or something. But Sandra Lynn's in there to ring up to tell me that she'd pinched the car, or pinched the ute, and there she was, hankered. Never forget that. Oh, God, I would want longer to cogitate, I suppose, to remember so many things that did go on here over a long period, and my memory is pretty good. I haven't forgotten a hell of a lot, but I have never forgotten my father, old Frank Saunders, would have been the biggest liar in the world, I think. I used to go up to the old place to see Kathy, and by the time he finished telling me tales, it was time to come home. And by hell, he could tell tales. Said some very funny things. There used to be an old bloke who later bought the old crib that I referred to earlier, Dick Church. And Dick had a horse, always reckoned he had the best horse in the world, and the biggest dray, and used to be shoveling sand into this. And he wanted to know of old Frank how many shovelfuls of runny sand it took to make a yard. Well, it would be impossible to verify that, because if the sand run 10% or 15% or 20% more than the other, well, you wouldn't know. And old Dick used to get on Dick Church, lived down the old crib, used to get on the gin. Would drink Gilbey's and refused to drink Vickers, just wouldn't drink it. Get full, eyes stick out about a foot, and he would then, they'd fill the Gilbey's bottle with Vickers and he'd go on that. And the old fellow and him would come home, my dad, and get down in front of our place, and by that time Dick was moving full width the footpath. And he always called him Uncle. Now he said, Uncle, you fall in the gutter and you keep going. You've got to get home. He lived about 300 down the bottom there, where the old crib was, or before your time, and there was a pipe across the gutter there, and he said, when you strike the pipe, you'll know you're home. I'll never forget this. In a Dick would have another couple of seconds, he'd go home down the gutter, and oh God, he and Rusty argued the point for years. At one time in his career, somebody pinched his crowbar, and we used to have a lot of crowbars, and he'd come into the shop and inspect them all to see if he could ever find his. And always had a useless horse, he didn't think they were, but there were always 4 nails on the outside of a reasonable sized horseshoe and 3 on the inside. And old Dick used to insist that there should be 4 on each side. Him and Rusty would start to argue the point. I would give it away to let him argue. And he was a funny old bugger. He finally burnt the place down. And his son, Jack Church, call him Stormy, still down the road there, looks after the old museum, moves at about the same pace, 1 mile a month, with luck. One of the characters of the place, I suppose, and there have been many, and I think I'm starting to run out of gas, only by virtue, I suppose, that I've chirped too much. And there are still a few blokes about the place that their memories seem to go. I suppose mine will one day too, about, things that have transpired. And many funny things have happened too. Mum's back again. Is it Mum? No, it's May. But her father, oh God, he told me some awful tales. He said he went one time to his sister's funeral at Myrtleford. In the days of the gigs and horses, how the hell they got up there I don't know. And there were an awful army of them. And he said his brother-in-law decided to take him round and show him his farm. He said he had about 2 acres. It was a bee farm. And there were dingo holes and raspberry holes and blackberry holes, and he'd fall down the whole lot of them, I reckon. And the bees flying around. He said that was the strength of the farm. But the next day the funeral was on, and his brother Tommy was there with him. A tribe of them, no clothes or no blankets, too many of them. So Tommy had a sheepskin, his brother Tommy, his eldest brother. So he waited till Tommy went to sleep, and he quietly whizzed the sheepskin out and wrapped himself up in it. And the next day, at the funeral, he was allotted a horse and a gig, and they allotted him an old stallion. And he said there were about 60 gigs at the show with mares and Christ knows what. And he said, I put in the whole day listening to the old horse going, woo! I never heard much about the funeral, but I'll never forget that. Oh, he's an awful man. He used to smoke black tobacco and drink plonk, and by God, he could do it too. Yeah, black tobacco and plonk. And I'd tell you some awful tales. But I think, Trevor, at the moment I'll pause. One day we'll have another crack at it, but I think I'm about run out of gas. We might go down and see Colt playing a bit of cricket. What time is it?